Hi, good evening, everybody. So my name is Lynn Lovell and I'm the Head of Professional Practice at the British Dyslexia Association. Brenda, did you just want to say hello? Or you're just on mute, my darling?
Hi, I'm Brenda Ferry. I've been working with Lynn for a very long time and I am the Head of Dyscalculia at the British Dyslexia Association. And Head of Professional Training there as well in terms of maths learning difficulties.
Brilliant, thank you, Brenda. So thank you also to Rebecca for that lovely introduction. I'm going to commandeer the first sort of 20 minutes of this webinar, and I'm going to be talking about how we can support young people with spelling. So just give me a moment while I share my screen. So I have a presentation and visual materials to show you at the same time. There we go. If I just minimize this here, and then you won't see that in the background. Lovely. Okay, so what I am hoping to cover in a very short 20 minutes is for us to understand why learning spellings can be hard for not just those with dyslexia, but those without dyslexia, and why it's more difficult for those with dyslexia. How we can make learning spellings fun, because if we make things fun, young people and older people will remember how to spell things. We're going to talk about some techniques to help with spelling rules, and there are lots of spelling rules, and we'll talk about those, and approaches for tackling the spelling of lots of different types of words, words that are spelt the way they sound, words that aren't, words that are tricky, and things like that. And very importantly, for memory is, for learning is memory. Memory is essential for learning. And spelling is one of those things that might not always stick in somebody's memory. So ways to help that stay in the memory is what I'm going to talk about. And hopefully lots of useful ideas and methods for supporting the learning of spellings. And that's where I'm going. So why is spelling so difficult for everybody? Why is it difficult for everybody? Well, spelling is not like reading where the letters are on the page. If you're reading, you see a word, it's on the page, and you've got something to start from. Whereas spelling, it's different. You've got to pull the information you know about spelling from your memory. There are different ways to write the same sound. So if you think about the sound ow, we can write it as OU in the word loud, or we can write it OW as in the word cow. So that's an example of why it's confusing. Not all words are spelt the way they sound, making it another layer of difficulty. So if you think of the word Wednesday, if you spelt it the way it sounded, it would be Wednesday. And there are lots of rules around spelling, lots and lots of rules. There's around sort of 20 that I can think of off the top of my head. So there are lots of rules, but there are also exceptions to those rules. So we teach learners rules, and of course there are exceptions to them. So that makes it difficult to learn spelling. And those rules and patterns are not easy to learn. And this applies to lots of individuals, not just those with dyslexia. Why is it so hard for those with dyslexia in particular? Well, the skills that those with dyslexia can find difficult, not everybody, but some can find difficult, are some of these things that I've listed here. So, for example, one of the core difficulties with dyslexia is a difficulty in using or knowing what sounds are, knowing how to apply them. And if you are with a young person, what we're talking about here is phonics, really. So knowing that sounds make letters and they're linked. They can also have a difficulty sequencing things in the right order, sequencing letters. And of course, when you're spelling, it's so important that the letters are in the right order. And as we talked about a moment ago, having a good memory is really, very, very important for the learning of spellings. And those with dyslexia may struggle with memory. Sometimes people have a very good memory, other times they don't have a particularly good memory. And sometimes those with dyslexia struggle to pull forward information at a quick and fluent speed, and this can have a particular impact when they're sort of writing any text in the classroom. If you're trying to pull forward the information about how to spell a word, it can significantly slow you down if your processing is not quick and fluent. And they can also have difficulties with motor coordination. So if you think about writing and spelling, they're trying to integrate lots of different things. They're trying to integrate their ideas, or they're copying from the board, so they're looking up, but it also involves them being able to do these things with good motor coordination. And sometimes learners with dyslexia struggle with that motor skill. So spelling is really, really difficult for everybody, but particularly for those with dyslexia. So how can we help them? That's the important thing. That's what we want to know this evening. Well, an important point that I'm going to highlight here is a really key point for learning anything really, particularly spellings, is multisensory learning. And what I mean by multisensory learning, people sometimes misunderstand, is doing more than one thing at the same time with your senses. It's not a case of I'll do a bit of looking, I'll do a bit of speaking, I'll do a bit of saying. It's doing more than one of those things at the same time. So as an example, you might ask an individual to trace letters that say the sound of it or the name of the letter at the same time. So they've got tactile feedback, but they're seeing it, hearing it, saying it. They can practice writing the letters, but they should be saying the sounds or the letter names at the same time. Just to be clear, sounds are appropriate where words are sounded out, where they can be sounded out. If a word can't be sounded out, it's a good idea to use the letter names. So they can either use the sound if it's sounded out, or the name if it can't be sounded out. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. If you are getting them to practice writing letters and saying the sound at the same time, just make sure that you're getting them to say a pure sound. What I mean by that is that we quite often add a at the end of letters. So the letter T is not pronounced T, it's T. If we added T to the word taste, we'd have T-aced. It's not T-aced, it's T-aced, taste. So it's really important if you're teaching anyone to sound out a word, to spell a word that's sounded out, that you don't add that at the end of letters, like T. Another example of multisensory learning is to write from memory, saying the sound and then the name. There's a kind of progression to this here. And then they could try writing it again with their eyes shut, so they're pulling into all their senses at the same time. So that's just a sort of simple example of the way that you can incorporate multisensory learning when you're teaching spelling. So what is the first step then? You're going to incorporate multisensory learning, but what's the first step in being able to spell? Well, the first step in being able to spell is being able to say the word clearly. Children must be able to say words clearly to be able to spell them, okay? So if they're not saying the word correctly, it's going to be even harder for them to spell it. And there are ways that you can do this that are quite fun, particularly for young people, but even for older ones. You could do the lovely robot voice. So you can make yourself sound like a robot when you're sounding it out, as long as it's clear, and they could do the same. Quite often people use teddy bears or puppets to say the sound, or get the young person to get the teddy bear or puppet to say the sound. And for younger ones or older ones, you might get them to record their own voice when they're saying it, so that when they get it right, keep that recording and they can play it back to themselves. It's quite fun for them. And with today's technology, everyone's got a phone, everyone's got a computer, and they can record audio quite easily. So it's quite an easy one to do. And you can also use that when words can't be sounded out. So if I go back to my earlier example of the word Wednesday, you could get them to record saying it Wednesday, so that they remember that the way it is spelt is with the sounds in it that they can't necessarily hear. And these sorts of things of sort of hearing it, writing it, doing it at the same time can help to support them to learn spellings. So let's have a little look at words that we can sound out. And there are ways to make it fun. So words that can be sounded out, all words in fact, can be divided into syllables. And syllables is basically, well, it's a beat, I guess, in a word. So if you put your hand under your chin when you're saying a word, every time your chin goes down, that's a syllable in a word. And there's actually a rule, a spelling rule that we could mention here about syllables. And that is that there is a vowel in every syllable. So if you are teaching your young person to learn to spell a word that can be sounded out using syllables, you could highlight to them that if there's a syllable, there's a vowel in it somewhere. And ways that you could do that and make it fun, you know, don't just say sit there and sound out the words using syllables, get them up, get them jumping the syllables. You know, every time there's a syllable, they could jump forward. You could do it using sort of letters on the floor, foam letters, nice big ones, or you could use a hopscotch grid outside. Another fun way of doing it is to have to keep an eye on the time, sorry, a musical instrument where they can clap out the syllables as well. They can cut up words into syllables, or they can use 3D letters and split them up into syllables. So that's ideal for words that can be sounded out. But what happens if they can't be sounded out? Well, there are very few words in the English language that don't have a pattern with other words. In fact, there's just a handful that don't have a pattern with other words. Lots of words can be related. And this is really important for people with dyslexia. And one of the reasons is, if they see a word and they just see it in isolation, that can be very scary. And it can make them feel like, well, I have to learn this word, and then I have to learn this word, and then I have to learn this word. And that's lots of words to try and remember. But actually, if we look at word patterns like we've got here, should, would, could, if they can learn the O-U-L-D, then they've only got one extra letter that they've got to put onto it. It makes it less scary, it makes it less overwhelming, and it makes it a lot easier to learn. And there are more, you know, unusual words like toffee and coffee. You know, they have a letter pattern, they can be taught together. So how can we teach these letter patterns? Well, sound pictures, I'm going to show you an example in just a moment, so hold on to that thought. You could match beginning and ends. So you could have the O-U-L-D that we've got here, and then you could just get the other letters and they could make them up. You know, does W make a word with O-U-L-D? Does C make a word with O-U-L-D? They could build them. And don't be afraid to get them up out of their seat. You say a word, does it, you know, is it related? Is it in the same family as the word that you've said before? Is it in the same family as a word that you've identified? Or you could act it, sing it, it doesn't matter, really don't mind. I'll give you some examples of how you can act and sing things out in a short while. Just a little note on the O-U-L-D pattern. Sometimes in schools, how they teach this is using the phrase, oh, you lucky duck. So the O-U-L-D, they have O, the U, and then L-D is the lucky duck. So that can be one way to help that one stick in memory. I did say we would have a little look at sound picture, and here it is. So sound pictures can be particularly useful if you've got little budding artists, or you're particularly good at art and you're trying to learn words in a pattern. And here's an example here. So this person was trying to learn the AI sound, and they were linking words that all have the AI sound. So as you can see, they've drawn a lovely picture of a train that's connected by a chain. It's on a rail, it's raining, the gentleman is staining it and painting it. So they've got a visual representation that all those words with the AI sound are linked. Okay, so that's another approach that you could use. So another approach, if you can't sound words out, is to look at root words. We call it morphology. So in the example that you can see here on the screen, the word clean is a root, okay? It's an individual part of a sound that has a meaning. And from that individual part of the word that has a meaning, you can build words. Now the word clean, actually, you'll be surprised how many words you can make from it. We've popped some examples here. So from the word clean, you can have cleaning, cleanse, unclean, but of course there's more, cleans, cleaner, cleanliness, etc. What does it do? It makes it less scary. If I learn the word clean, I can probably spell cleaning because I already know the ing sound. I can spell the word cleaner. I can spell the word cleans. So not only do I know the word clean, but then I know at least 4 other words as well. And, you know, if you've got people that like to draw, you can draw it. You could do this on a computer. They can make it. They can build words. You could have a competition to see who could make the longest word. You know, spelling doesn't have to be scary. And it doesn't have to be boring either, if I'm allowed to say that. Okay, so we did say that we would touch on spelling rules. Spelling rules help to explain why words are spelt the way they are in the English language, where they can seem to young people that there is a lack of consistency. Spelling rules help add a sense of consistency to this apparently otherwise chaotic language. And they give that young person additional word tag skills. So not only can I use one approach, but I might know the rule and therefore I can apply the rule. Now, some people will just pick those rules up by reading or from things they do in the classroom or in the lecture hall or wherever they are. People with dyslexia might not necessarily pick these things up automatically. So it can be quite important to teach those spelling rules explicitly. And not just to do that, but to do it in context, so applying it to a word. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. So, does the word start with a K or a C? Now, the rule is that if it's got a vowel A or O, it's got C in front of it, like the words can and con. But if it's an E or an I, it's got a K in front of it, like kin or ken. Okay, they're spelled with the same sound, k, con, ken, kin. They're all this k sound, but we know that the C is because the vowel after it is an A or an O, and the K is because it's A, O, or U, and the K is because it's an E or an I. And we can teach that with a game. Okay, so you could have a K and a C on a piece of paper, on a board, on a wall, or wherever you're working, and you could say to them, right, the word kin, is it a K or a C? And they could splat it, whichever one it is. There are fun ways of doing it. You could do it with bingo. I've got the word kin. Have you got a K? You cross it through, it's a bingo. You might get a line. There are lots of rules like that that we can tap into. Another example would be W. Okay, now W is considered a wicked letter as it can change the syllable after it. So if you think of the word warm, warm is not warm. The sound A in warm doesn't make an A sound because it's got W in front of it. It makes an O sound, warm. Yeah. So sometimes one way to do that is to dress up as a witch. You know, particularly Halloween coming up, that might be quite a fun way to do, to learn about that wicked what sound that changes the vowel sound after it. Just some examples there. Now, there are lots of videos on YouTube that you could look at that explain these rules. You don't have to think of them, you don't have to look them up. There are videos there. There are rhymes and actions like, well, it's wicked, you could do actions to go with it. And that's some ways of learning spelling rules. How long have I got? Not very long, sorry. Okay, right. So another way that you may well be familiar with is something called mnemonics. And mnemonics is where the first letter of a phrase that you can make up helps you spell out a word. And this one here is a common example. So the phrase big elephants can always understand small elephants spells out the word because. I wouldn't suggest overusing mnemonics because that can cause more of a pressure on memory. But for those words that are particularly tricky, they can be very useful. And the more fun they are, the more ridiculous they are, the more animated you can be when you're acting them out, the more active you can be, the more they'll be remembered. So as an example, there is a sound in the word light, which is I-G-H-T. And you can get up and you can go and switch off the light and you can say, I turn off the light when I go home tonight. I-G-H-T. I turn off the light when I go home tonight. And you can be switching your light off at the same time. You can get a nice coloured handbag into it, you know, use your imagination. Okay, more ideas for when you can't sound things out. So lots of visual and tactile sort of approaches that you could use. You could draw around a word if it's got a particular shape to it, particularly if it's got letters that go high above the line or above the base, as it were, or below the line, ascenders and descenders, as they're called. You could get 3D letters and feel them when you're creating the word. You could ask people to write in a medium. So you could have a tray full of salt, sand, flour, shaving foam, anything that gives you a bit of tactile feedback. And they can write the word in that medium and it gives them that tactile feedback and it helps the motor memory to be able to remember how to spell things. You could create pictures, you could look for words within words. I'll have a little look at an example in a minute. You could skywrite it. Washing up liquid bottle, that's quite a fun one if nobody's got a dishwasher or still washes up. You can put water in a washing up liquid bottle, go outside, and you can write it rather large on the wall, the word that you're trying to learn. You can use colour and anything where the motor memory is triggered, as it were, can be used as a tool to support memory and spelling. Or you can use flashcards with a lovely picture of the word there and a picture associated with it, and you can do a repetitive style of learning. So lots of ideas there, and I'm throwing them out there. But as Rebecca said at the beginning, we will send out a video recording if you did want to watch this again. So let's have a little think about the word said. How could we teach the word said? It's a tricky word. It's not spelled as it sounds. So some suggestions. A mnemonic. Quite a common one that is used for the word said is Sally Ann is dancing. So it spells out S-A-I-D, Sally Ann is dancing. And, you know, if you like dancing, you can get up and you can do that. You could colour in the unusual letter pattern, which is the AI. So in the word said, S and D, that's fine, they sound it, but AI is an E sound in this word. So we could highlight that using colour. We could draw around that word because it's got a D at the end that goes higher than the other letters. Or we could look at the word within the word, which is A-I-D, the word aid. Or, as we said before, we could write it in shaving foam or salt or sand in the tray. Just some ideas, and I'm going to throw a few more ideas at you that come under different banners. So we've got games, and do have a look at Amazon. There are games on Amazon that aren't particularly expensive that will teach letter patterns. So you've got bingo games on there, you've got matching games, you've got domino games where you can match the letter patterns, etc., and word family games. You've got computer games and apps. So there is a computer program called Nessie that teaches literacy and spelling. There is a website that's completely free. It's called Call Scotland, as in phone call Scotland. And on there is a downloads page. And on the downloads page, it's literally got apps for every difficulty that you might see. But there are literacy apps on there, including spelling. And we've got websites like education.com, Top Marks, Word Games, and Spelling City. So just a few ideas there of the sorts of computerized apps and games. Lots of people have access to a computer or a phone or a tablet. So those are some useful ideas. And they could have spelling aids. So these sort of more hands-on things. It can help young people to have their own dictionary of words that they struggle with, that they pop in a little personalized dictionary and refer back to when they're trying to spell that word when they're writing. Or if they are secondary age or older, they could have subject-specific words that they refer to. Things like science, geography, all those sorts of subjects, they have some very specific words to them that can be very difficult to spell. I like using the example from English, which is onomatopoeia. I mean, who knows how to spell that? Somebody does that, I'm sure, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So they could have that in a subject glossary. And of course, there are spell checkers. There are spell checkers on phones, on computers, and there are even handheld ones. And if they are being required to write and spelling is a real issue, then they could then tap into speaking software. And lots of Word and Apple technology has speaking software within it now that there is no extra charge for. So technology has come a long way, and it's not a bad thing. But at the end of the day, to learn spelling does require writing it at some point, but all these tools can be used as methods of making it easier and giving these memory hooks to help them learn their spellings. Okay, we've just got a little holding slide there. Have managed it in about 20 minutes, so I'm not doing too badly. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Lovely job. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. We will do questions and answers for both myself and Brenda at the end, but just for now, I will hand over to the lovely Brenda to talk about times tables. Thank you.
I need to, Rebecca, could you start my video? Please.
I don't know if I have the power to do that. Claudia, oh, there you are.
Okay.
It's done.
Lovely, no, that's fine. Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, so now it's my turn to talk to you about times tables, and why learners with dyslexia particularly have difficulties with times tables. I'm now going to just share my screen with you. And I hope you can all see that. Lynn, can I have
You're all good.
Yes,
all
I'm
good,
all
Brenda.
good. Okay, supporting times tables. Okay, so this session is going to look at why do children find it hard to learn times tables? Why do children with dyslexia find it particularly hard? And what can we do to help? Well, for a start, I always think that the word times table is a complete nonsense. If you talk to children and say, what do you understand by times table? They may look at you completely blankly and think about a table and a clock. So what do we really mean by times tables? Times tables are actually multiplication facts. And it's this idea that you have a group of objects and that you can make more of that group, and that is what multiplication is about. So that's the first premise. And why did children with dyslexia find it particularly hard is because some of the core deficits of dyslexia are the following: is automatic recall, having access to being able to find a fact and pull it out immediately. As Lynn was saying about the spellings, they find that really difficult. And it's one of the key things that we look for when we are making a diagnosis of dyslexia. It's called rapid naming. They also have difficulties with processing speed. So again, if they are suddenly put on the spot and asked for what is 7 times 6, that processing speed can be slower and make the learner feel very uncomfortable that the answer is not automatic. And working memory as well. That working memory is the ability to hold on to information long enough on your shelf to be able to do something useful with it. So when they talk about mental maths, they're not really talking about whether you can do maths at all. What they are doing is talking about how great your working memory is. And people with dyslexia find mental maths and doing things on the spot and quickly like that, and also orally where they can't see it, extremely difficult. They also may have problems with sequencing, and this affects maths in lots of different ways because it's seeing patterns in things and also maybe following out a procedure in the right order. And again, dyslexics find this more difficult than most people. And we need to have a visual input. And a lot of the times, maths is not taught visually enough. We need to get back to much more teaching with concrete materials and things that the children can touch and feel so that they can get these visual images. So most people are taught to recite their times tables by rote, but actually they do not understand what they are doing and what the purpose is. And children may not even have an idea of what the values are and what's involved. And the symbols seem to be unconnected and meaningless. What actually does that times, that cross in the middle between two numbers actually mean? So actually multiplication is a very fundamental concept about having groups of a number. And we can start teaching that very early on. You know, here we have 2 groups of 2 teddies. So in effect, what we've got is 2 times 2. And here we have 3 groups of 2 teddies. And that is going to make 6 bears in total. And here we could have 2 groups of 3 bears, which also gives 6. So as I say, from a very young age, you can get children to just be sorting different objects into different groups. So, you know, all the little stuffed animals, let's put them all into groups of 3. Let's put them all into groups of 2. Let's put them all into groups of 5. What would happen if we had this number of teddies and we were going to put them into the different groups? Now we've got the different groups and we put them all back together again. How many do we have? That is the fundamental concept of multiplication. And so it is a process of repetitive addition, because if you have one group, you've got this number. If you've got 2 groups, you've got a second number. And children need to be able to make a visual image of what multiplications tables or multiplications are. So in this diagram, we've got 4 lots of 3. In other words, we've got 4 columns and each column has got 3 counters in it. And on the other side, we've got 3 lots of 4 counters. And so actually these are the same number of counters, but just in a different orientation. And they are both giving 12. So they need to be able to see this, and that's what the numbers are. And they need to be able to step count. So if you look at the 4 lots of 3, they would be counting as this is 1 lot of 2. This is 2 lots of 2 that gives me 6. This is 3 lots of 2. Oh, sorry, 3 lots of 3, which is going to give me 9. And then it's 4 lots of 3, which is going to give me 12. So step counting is a very, very important skill for a learner with dyslexia. And as I say, the other thing that they need to learn along with multiplication is that the inverse of multiplication is division. They're almost like Siamese twins, or twins certainly, that multiplication goes one way and division goes the other way. So here you've got your 6 teddies and you are sharing them into 2 groups. And here you've got your same 6 teddies, but you are sharing them into 2 groups. The other one was into 3 groups and this is in 2 groups. So they can start to see that if you put those groups back together again, it's multiply. And if you're sharing them out, it's dividing. And again here, the word problems that need to come in. And we always need to talk about word problems and try and make maths as real as possible for them to understand it. Otherwise, you know, multiplication and all these things just seem too abstract. So if I had 4 groups of 3 sweets, how many sweets would I have altogether? And that would be the multiplication side, and then the division or the sharing side would be if I had 12 sweets and I had to share them between 4 friends, how many would each friend have? So that we are going through the process of looking at what we call the concrete, then the pictorial before we go into the abstract, and then making it real. And then we have to talk about the language of maths. The language of maths is very difficult anyway, and particularly difficult for learners with dyslexia. We have all sorts of words that are common English words that we have that have completely different meanings in maths, like product, which means multiplication. And then we have all the other sort of words like parallelogram that are distinct to maths. So here we've got the symbol of a cross or an X. And children see that symbol lots of times. It can also mean that you've got something wrong. And for some children, that's all they see, is that it's a cross, it's wrong. And yet it's being introduced into something called times tables. So that cross can mean multiply, it can mean times, it can mean product, it can mean lots of, it can mean of, it can mean groups, it can mean quotient, it can mean all sorts of different things. And we need to be very clear, especially with learners with dyslexia, that we teach language specifically and that these meanings are completely understood, and we must not assume that they know what these are because they absorb it. And so, as I say, we always need to teach in stages of conceptual understanding. That first of all, they need to be using concrete manipulatives. So they need to be using the counters or another type of concrete material where they are building what the mathematical concept is. And in this case, it is multiplications. It is groups of things. Let's build groups of 4 lots of 5, 5 lots of 4, 6 lots of 3, 6 lots of 2. And then they need to be able to draw this either with tally marks or groupings or on square paper, so they can actually see that multiplication is an area. Because if you've got 4 lots of 3, it's an area of 12. And then you go into the abstract symbols and formal notation. And a lot of the times that children with dyslexia can do maths extremely well without going near the symbols and the formal notation. And it does upset me quite a lot when you read through the maths, the national curriculum, and it says that children need to learn how to do column multiplication or column addition, or not column addition, but long division in a formal way, because actually it's so easy to be able to do it through a pictorial way, and the abstract way is very difficult for learners with dyslexia. So in the first instance, children need to learn about dot patterns. That, like with spelling, you get shown a symbol. So you're shown the symbol of an A, and you're told that that particular symbol makes the sound A or the sound A. With maths, you're shown the symbol 5, and you are told that that sounds 5. But what we need to also be able to do is to help the child be able to visualize, to form an internal picture of what 5 looks like. And so it could be a dot pattern like this, or it could be a numicon pattern or something, so they get an idea of what 5 looks like. And then they can see that actually 5 can be broken down into various other things. So in that 5, you can be a 4 and a 1, or a 3 and a 2. And then you get patterns of developing a double 5, and this is what it looks like. So that all the time what you are doing is that you are matching what the word is, like 5, to the symbol 5, to actually what it's worth, its value. And it's this value that children with dyslexia, particularly children with dyscalculia, find very difficult to put together. But once they develop this and the flexibility of number, and to see how numbers can be broken down or partitioned and put back together again, that they get the confidence to be able to deal with numbers. So as I say, Numicon is a wonderful tool. And it's great to see that this is coming in so much in primary schools at the moment, because they can take the tile and you can say to them, you know, how many other tiles can you fit into this? What happens if you get 2 of the 5 tile or 2 of the 6 tile? What does it make? Match it up to the other tiles. And this flexibility of number is what we need to be able to do multiplication properly. So as I say, on the left-hand side, you've got 2 lots of 3, and the other one is, 2 lots of 3, and the other one is 2 lots of 3. So you've got two lots of 3. But if you put those together in a different format, you could end up with 3 lots of 3, and then 1 lot of 3, so that you're breaking these apart. It's still going to give you a similar number. So this is where we get into being able to do complex times tables or multiplications. Because if you've got an 8 by 7, you can actually break that. If you put all those counters out, you could say, well, actually, we've got one little square here, which is the square of 5 times 5. We know our 5 times 5 table. We might not know our 8 times 7 table, and that's pretty scary. But we know our 5 times 5 table. And then we've got another little square there that is our 3 times 5 table. And then we've got another little square there that is a 5 times 2 table and a 3 times 2 table. So we know our 5 times table because that's quite an easy one to learn. It's got a pattern in it, you know, it's 5 and a 0 and then 5 and a 0. And we know our 3 times table because we can step count that, and we can step count that using the knuckles on our fingers. So we count up 3 and then 6 and then 9. And so if we put all those values together, 5 times 5 is 25, 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 2 is 10, 3 times 2 is 6, and add all those together, you're going to get 56, which is the same as 7/8. Once they know how to do this and break numbers down, then they can see how they can actually make very complicated multiplications. So you actually only really need to know your 2 times table, your 3 times table, and your 5 times table, and know how to break or partition all the other numbers into components of these. And this is where we go from the concrete to a grid method of multiplication, and there you've got the abstract. So your grid method, you might have Cuisenaire rods and you've got 12 times 13, which is pretty scary. But you can break that down into a 10 by 10, a 10 by 2, a 3 by 10, and a 3 by 3. And so when you do that in the grid method, going from the concrete to the pictorial, this is what you've got. So 10 by 10 is 100, 10 by 2 is 20, 10 by 3 is 30, 2 by 3 is 6. Then you add all those together and you get 56, which is so much easier for learners to conceptualize and see than going straight into column multiplication. Because often what you get when you've got column multiplication is say 12 by 13, and you've got children who go, well, I've been told to multiply the top by the bottom, so I'm going to multiply 2 by 3, which has given me 6, 1 by 1, which has given me 1, my answer is 16. No concept of the magnitude of those numbers because they haven't been able to see them. And again, you've got use of Cuisenaire rods and the commutative property. So 3 lots of 4 is 12, 4 lots of 3 is 12. And if you put it up the other way, they actually have the same area. And this is also the Slavonic Abacus. You can do the same thing by partitioning different numbers so that you've got little squares of numbers and working them out like that. And also the use of Cuisenaire rods and the number track. So again, you've got a question of this inverse multiplication and division. So if you pick up, say, the green 6 rod and you say, you've got 7 of those, put them into the track, where are you getting to? So you've got the 6 and it's the 7 and you're getting to the 42. And likewise then, if you take a target number, say whatever it is, 56 or whatever, and you say, how many of the 6 rods can I possibly get into this particular number track? So you're doing the going forwards with multiplication, and if you like, sort of breaking down by doing the division. So of the 121 multiplication facts, we actually only need to know 27. And what I do with all my students is to teach them how to make their own multiplication grid. And this is a multiplication grid. So we start off with the 2 times table, and they fill that in and they do it by step counting. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Then if they double that, because they've been taught doubling, they have their 4 times table, because they can see that, from the counters and building what the multiplication looks like, that your 4 times table is your double 2 times table. Then you can do your 3 times table, which again is you can do by step counting. So 3, 9, 12. And then if you double your 3 times table, you get your 6 times table, and you filled that one in as well. Your 5 times table is a nice little pattern of noughts and 5s. Your 7 times table you can do by adding your 5 times table to your 2 times table. So if you've got your 2 times table and 5 times table, you can fill in your 7 times table. 8 times table is either your double 4 times table, or it's your 7 times table plus another 1 times table, or the 10 times table taken away the 2 times table. So they can fill in this grid, and all my students learn how to fill this from about, we start filling it in slowly from about year 5, even sometimes year 4. And then by the time they get to year 7 and going into secondary school, they can fill in this multiplication grid in less than 5 minutes. And then when they go to GCSE and they have to do a non-calculator paper, they start by doing their multiplication grid, and they have it there so that when they have any single question that involves multiplication, they can refer to it immediately instead of being under pressure to recall facts. So also with this, it can be used for division as much as it can be used for multiplication. So along the top, you have lots of, and then down the side, you have the actual number. So if you pick something like, I've got 48, how many lots of 6 have I got in 48? So you'd go down the side, those are my lots of, go along till I've got to 48, go up again, and I've got 8 lots. So 8 lots of 6 is 48. And then you do the triangulation, where you have 8 times 6 is 48, 6 times 8 is 48, because you can go up and down on that grid. You've got 48 divided by 6 is going to give you 8, and you've got 48 divided by 8 is also going to give you 6. So this is such a powerful tool. And when they understand how you get there, it can be used, as I say, for all multiplication and division facts. And there is also a company who produced a flexi table. And so actually you can fold it in at the corner to find out what number you want. So you could fold that back. If you say had 48 divided by 6, you could fold back your 48 along where you've got your lots of 6, and it would take you up to the 8.
Just a couple more minutes, Brenda, all right?
Yes, no, I'm there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then here we've got, different ways of using the fingers. This one is quite effective. There is another one that is more difficult, but always with learners with dyslexia, must always be always make them understand what they're doing, not just showing them what they're doing. So how can we help? One is that we need to develop the flexibility of number. With your kids, get them to play around with the counters and do lots of this and then sharing it out and putting them together. And then talk to them about multiplication in real life, twice as many, double as many, 10 times as much. Teach the multiplication square, but teach it for understanding. Use concrete materials when step counting, so that you're doing this. Never put children on the spot. What are 7 times 8? What are 4 times 3? Let's build them and let them see it. And this will avoid maths anxiety. 1 in 4 children have maths anxiety. It's a big problem in this country. And a lot of it has come from being put on the spot to come up with numbers like that instantly. And dyslexic children can't do it well because they can't see it. So, So that's everything from me. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and I hope that you have found it helpful.
Brilliant, spot on time as well, Brenda. Sorry about that. Absolutely fantastic. I love listening to Brenda. I always learn everything from Brenda. She knows everything about this. Thank you very much. There are some questions in the Q&A. To avoid confusing myself, I will start with the first ones and sort of pick a few out for ones around spelling, and then we'll move on to the ones for Brenda for times tables. Okay. Unfortunately, I probably won't be able to answer all the questions. We won't be able to answer all of them, but I'll try and pick out a few to answer. Okay, so do we recommend teaching phonetic spellings or sight words? That's a very topical question at the moment, and has been for a little while. And if you're really particularly interested, there's some debate between analytical and phonetic spelling, the learning of them. And the answer really is that, all right, young people generally learn phonetical spellings, but they need to be taught alongside one another. Some words are phonetical, some words aren't. So both approaches is recommended, I would say. With regards to the difficulties that young people with dyslexia have, or anybody with dyslexia, in terms of memory processing and sequencing, does that improve with age? Good question. I think the answer to that is the underlying difficulties of dyslexia don't change. It's the way that people manage them that can change. You can, as we say, learn techniques to support memory, learn techniques for sequencing things like mnemonics. But the underlying difficulties that are caused by dyslexia don't go away in and of themselves. That's a good question. So the young person has got a spelling list that the school give them. Should we be teaching them a different spelling list, bearing in mind spelling patterns? Well, I think probably if you look at the spellings that the schools are sending home, they usually are in patterns. So schools tend to send home a list of 10 spellings and they're quite often related to one another. But I certainly wouldn't say go against what the school is teaching that young person, because otherwise you're giving them conflicting information. So work together with the school, I would say. How do you encourage someone recently diagnosed with their spelling? Actually, this is talking about a teenager here. So, you know, what do teenagers like to do? They like to be on their phone, things like that. So I would suggest making use of the apps if you can, but also, you know, some of those fun activities, you know, games, computer games, things like that, where they might subliminally learn spellings. Sorry, should I look at them? So, oh, Brenda, any top tips to teach a child how to read time?
There is a lovely video by Dave Allen. It's a little bit politically incorrect, and the end of it is buy them a digital watch. But not being, you know, joking apart, telling the time is very difficult because we've got all the language of time. They've got two bases. So the base is that you know, you've got 60 as a base for the minutes, and you've got 12 for the hours. I always, if I've got to teach the analog, I teach it on I get a bead string, and instead of having it circular like the clock is, I undo it and have it broken, have little knots every 5 beads along, and show that the second hand will go to every single bead, and the minute hand goes to every single bead, and the hour hand only goes to the knots. So as one goes along to 12 knots, the other one is going along to 60 beads, and then it comes back again. And when they get the idea of that on a linear, then you can put it round. But it's very difficult because you've got 2 after, you've got 1/4 to, 1/4 past. And as I say, Dave Allen's video, although it's a little bit risky, he does raise some quite good points about the fact that, you know, why is the little hand, the hour hand, pointing to 5 and we call it 1? I mean, it's quite tricky. But that's what I do. If I have to teach it, I teach it as a linear bead.
Lovely, thank you, Brenda. This is quite a good one. So we talked about X signaling a mistake and you know, trying to avoid it. Is there a better way to signal that someone has made a mistake?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to say it again? Sorry. That's all right.
Sorry. Sorry, could you repeat that one? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem at all.
I was actually reading some of the chats there. Sorry.
That's all right. No, they're really good, aren't they? Loads of good questions. So we talked about X being representative of a mistake. What might be an alternative to using an X instead?
I think, well, I mean, smiley faces are really good, and just put a smiley face against all the ones that are right, because actually a wrong answer is wrong answers. Getting things wrong, we need to get away from bringing up children with getting things wrong. I mean, Dyson got his vacuum cleaner technically 250 times wrong before he got the right one. Edison got his light bulbs 2,000 times wrong before he got the right one. There are lots of different ways to getting to the answer. And so I think that we shouldn't have the word wrong is that you haven't quite got it right yet. So when you've got it right, let's give you a smiley face. If you haven't quite got it right yet, let's find a different way to do it, because that's another problem, is that we get into procedural teaching of maths, you know, that it's almost like a rote teaching, and this is the way to do it. And actually what we need to do is explore all the different ways that you could get to that answer.
Lovely. There's another one for you here, and I think it carries across several questions actually. It's about resources. So someone was saying about the teddy bears being a good idea. Some people ask about the multiplication grid. Where can they find some of these resources?
Well, the Numicon is, I mean, it's lovely that Numicon is found such a lot in primary schools, and actually they could be used with secondary students as well, although the primary colours the secondary students don't like so much. For parents, you can pick up Numicon on eBay. The counters you can use, you can get double-sided counters. They're great because you build a grid and you can turn the ones over, so you can make a 5 by 5 square, or, you know, to show that, like the example I gave of the 7 times 8, and you can break them up, and so you can use the different colors on the other side. Again, that comes, those come out of eBay. The multiplication grid, you can either make your own or flexi tables. That's a company it did, is flexi tables, and they've done it, and then you bend it up to do the multiplication or the division. And I think flexi tables, every single child should have a flexi table, as they have a pencil and you know, a pencil to go to school. They should go to school with a flexi table, because they would take all the fear out of multiplications. It would have that sort of security of being able to do them if they know how to work it, and then the confidence would come to be able to actually create their own. So Cuisinart rods, they're also on, you can get those on eBay, and there's a very good ATM, which is it's the Teachers of Mathematics, Association of Teachers of Mathematics. They do an ebook. Also Ronit Bird, she is on the, she does lots of videos on times tables. She's got an ebook on times tables, which is very good. Steve Chin has a very good book on times tables also. So there are some good resources out there.
Brilliant, lots of good tips there. Thank you, Brenda. I'm just going to do one each for each of us because we are out of time. I'm so sorry to everyone that's asked a question. So one for me is a student has difficulty with articulation and struggles to say words out loud. How would we go about teaching them spelling? Well, as we mentioned earlier, they've got to be able to hear it accurately to be able to spell it. So I would suggest then in that case that either yourself or an automatic online source would say that, and that they would listen to it rather than say it themselves. So they need that clear understanding of what the word is, so it would need to be clear. And Brenda, there's one here about number bonds. Any advice for teaching number bonds?
The same thing, counters. Because counters and Cuisinart rods, we are fixated by number bonds to 10, but actually you do number bonds to any single number. So Cuisinart rods, you know, you've got the 10 rod, and you can do the staircase. Ronit Bird, as I say, will talk about this in her books. So Ronit is R-O-N-I-T and Bird. So it's that flexibility of number. How many different ways can you break 6 up? You know, how many different ways can you break 7 up? So the number bond of 7 is 6 and 1, 5 and 2, 3 and 4. And it's those facts that are the building blocks. It's those facts are the alphabet of arithmetic. So that's what they need to know. All those number bonds up to every single number. And you can do them through the counters and the Cuisinart rods and the number tracks.
Lovely, fantastic. I'll just answer one very, very quickly. Sorry, I know you're there, Rebecca. Somebody's asking if dyslexia is genetic. There is strong research to suggest yes, dyslexia is genetic. Sorry, Rebecca, carry on.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you for submitting your questions. I thought I would just point out quickly that if your question didn't get answered, we do have our amazing helpline service, which are really great, and you can submit any questions to them and they can be forwarded on to the right department. All their details can be found on the website, and also they are now contactable through Instagram, DM, as well as Facebook Messenger. So that's just good for you guys to know. So just a reminder, keep your eye out on our website and for our social media across the week, especially during Dyslexia Awareness Week. I'm sure many of you have seen all the amazing stuff that we're already putting out. And it just leaves me to say thank you so much to Linda and Brenda and everyone else who joined us. So thank you for your time, everyone. That's great.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.